For 70 weeks, we have watched, listened, resisted. We have taken a knee, rocked the vote, and marched for our lives. From Syria to Silicon Valley, from Parkland to Palestine. We have protested, raged, rallied. And now 1,500 immigrant children have been swallowed by the belly of a dark valley. Travel to America for a future of peace, meant by the callous carelessness of border police. We started this series when Betsy DeVos proposed privatizing public education, insisting our children pay for the debts of this nation. We end where we began, with our eyes on our children and our hearts on change, dismantling fake news and committed to the truth. However strange, the state of the world calls out for poetry to save it. You've got a voice. Go out to the polls and raise it. How many of our children must slip through the cracks before we rise and take our country back? We, the youth, are your new leaders of today. We've got our eyes on you, America, and we've got so much more to say.
Hello, and welcome to Into Action, Our Voice, Our Power, presented by March for Our Lives and Sankofa.org. This is day 3 of an exciting month of programming. You can check out the full program on our website, into-action.us. Before we get started, I really want to take a second and recognize our amazing presenting organizations and all of our movement partners, all of the panelists, all of the artists and volunteers who pulled this together. I also want to take a moment and to recognize all of you guys tuning in far and near. Today is International Youth Day, which gives us an opportunity to celebrate and elevate young people's voices, actions, and have some real talk about the things that are most directly affecting our lives. Expect some meaningful discussions with themes exploring our interdependence. We have a packed hour of exciting programming centered around youth political power and the impact that we will have on the world. My name is Winter Brianne. I'm a youth advocate and organizer originally from Riverside, California, but I'm currently quarantining with friends and family in Long Island, New York. I'm also a student at Howard University. I'm getting ready to start my sophomore year this semester. So when I was around 14 or 15 years old, I started an organization called Black is Lit, which is really just devoted to creating space for marginalized youth by introducing them to storytelling and telling the stories of the everyday person within our community. I also have worked on various projects and national campaigns, but one that is really near and dear to my heart is the Power of Future Voters lesson plan and curricula that I was able to put out into over 20,000 schools across this nation. The point of that was to really start to inspire young elementary age students to get thinking about what it looks like to get involved in politics and civically engaged at a young age. Many people believe that young people somehow don't care about politics, as if we don't see that our peers are being shot in our schools and on our streets, as if we don't feel the walls of our schools closing in on us as they become more and more militarized, and the school to prison pipeline has spread across this country like wildfire. Our education doesn't reflect our history or invest in our potential. As if we don't choke with asthma and watch as climate change threatens our very lives, or feel the consequences of your laws upon our bodies, our health care, or lack of it. As if we don't see them tearing apart families one at a time. As if we too don't have to memorize their names. Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Andres Guardado. So yeah, we're paying attention. What happens in DC, and state houses, and city halls, and the offices of school districts across this country affects us and our lives every damn day. And we're here to say enough. We're ready to take the power back, to create our own path together. So let's go in, y'all. March for Our Lives harnesses the power of young people across the country to fight for sensible gun violence prevention policies that save lives. Check them out at marchforourlives.com. So we set up downstairs, but we have so much in store for you. From Senator Cory Booker to Trevor Jackson, from Logan Browning, my personal fave, to Los Racas, conversations about intersectionality, gender, dance as an act of resistance, and the 2020 election. So stay with us. Young people understand how crucial it is for us to play a role in shaping our future, but they want us to sit down and be quiet. They want us to stay out of the fight. They know that when we show up, when we vote, we win. Voting is one way that we can take our destiny into our own hands and hold elected officials accountable to represent us. Democracy doesn't work if we don't vote.
Governor confirming that coronavirus has arrived here.
When we were stuck inside, we wondered, would we face the plague of gun violence again? Will we fear gathering in our schools and our churches again? Will we be shot for the color of our skin again? But a fight for justice forced us out to fill the empty streets. Black Americans are still being killed for being black in America. The pandemic hitting Black, Indigenous, and people of color disproportionately has only worsened the epidemic of gun violence in those same communities. Because it's clear the fight for racial justice is still on, and we won't live without it. In Colorado, he stood against hatred, but in Wisconsin, he carried a Confederate flag. In Arizona, she stood for her patients, but in Michigan, she carried a swastika. They bought guns in record numbers, but we took it to the streets. So when we leave our homes this time, will the people carrying weapons of war and banners of hatred decide our future again? Or will we stand up and demonstrate our power? Our power means we demand all gun sales will be licensed. Our power means we demand weapons of war be banned for good. Our power means lawmakers must listen. Our power means we refuse to watch Black people be murdered in the streets. Our power means we refuse to fear for our lives. We refuse to live without justice. It's our power, and we will use it.
There is never an inappropriate time to talk about what we can do to end gun violence. So let's do just that. Up next, a discussion on guns and gun violence with Senator Cory Booker, David Hogg, Tatiana Washington, and Trayvon Bosley.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're joined here with Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, and we're going to be having a conversation about gun violence and how to engage the youth in the upcoming election. Before we get into it, allow me to introduce myself and my fellow panelists. My name is Jacqueline Corin. I am calling in from Parkland, Florida, and I am an original co-founder of March for Our Lives.
Hello, my name is Trayvon Bosley. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I got involved with the violence prevention movement in April 4th, 2006, when my brother Terrell Bosley was shot and killed at church. And I'm part of the Brave Youth Leaders here in Chicago, and now I'm a member of the Student Congress in March for Our Lives.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana. I am from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a state policy associate with March for Our Lives. And I also do work at 50 Miles More here in Milwaukee.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. All right, well, we'll jump into it. My first question for Senator Booker is, how can we get more federal funding for violence intervention programs for gun violence prevention?
Look, the reality is you get, what did Frederick Douglass says? power concedes nothing without a demand. And we know what works in our communities. There are so many evidence-based examples when we have federal funding for violence prevention programs. I've done a lot of things from my Senate seat advocating for those resources. I have a bill called Break the Cycle of Violence Act that would provide federal funding for those specific evidence-based programs. So what's working around the country. And by the way, for federal dollars you invest in programs like that, it saves taxpayers and society multiple more than that when you actually lower that violent crime. And this act, the Break the Cycle of Violence Act, would provide, a lot of federal communities, grants to a lot of communities that experience 20 or more homicides a year and have a homicide rate that's at least twice the national average. So I could go through with you a lot about the specific things we can do, but I want to get back to that first thing, which is Frederick Douglass's advice. We have to know, and I know the folks listening know this, because there has been not a single great act done by Washington. I'm talking about the momentous acts, whether it's suffrage or civil rights or voting rights or workers' rights, that was not preceded by activism, by people taking to the streets, by people finding ways to be creative artists of activism, finding new ways to protest and demand change. There's an old saying that says change doesn't come from Washington, it comes to Washington. And so there are advocates and allies in elected positions in Washington. I hope there are more. I hope people listening to me will run for office. We clearly need to change office holders. But remember, the consistency of history means that if we're going to get these anti-violence programs funded, we have to be more concerted and concentrated and focused in our efforts to demand that the funding comes. Because I'm tired of seeing us spend so much money on the back end of problems when we could spend a fraction of it on the front end of problems that would reduce violence overall. And a lot of the wisdom, I hope, the circles of empathy and understanding coming out of the George Floyd protests, Breonna Taylor protests, the protests that we're seeing Black Lives Matter and other organizations push, is this understanding that we could reduce the need for so much law enforcement if we make the effort to invest in the things that would actually create real, true public safety and a lack of the need for so much policing in our communities overall.
And my question, I just want to preface it, as you know, like gun violence in Chicago and other inner cities like Chicago is happening on the daily. And many people are like hopeless when it comes to policies and other things in Washington changing the situations we have here, because it's happening so fast and policy tends to move pretty slowly for the most part. So what can politicians and senators and congressmen and women, what can they be doing in the now to try to solve the solution to everyday gun violence in most inner city communities?
Well, when you ask specifically what can the elected leaders in Congress or the Senate or politicians in general can do, and I hear you when you say things move slowly, and they do. They move slowly until they don't. Remember, a lot of the discussions about John Lewis, the Voting Rights Act was painfully not moving, slow, but it was the protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that ignited a very quick change. And LBJ was the president back then, President Johnson, and suddenly it moved. So things move slowly until they don't, and then there's leaps forward. And one of my strategies as a senator is always to be looking for the opening that we can hit to move things forward that are going to make a big difference in communities. People told me it would be impossible to pass criminal justice reform and take a whack at mass incarceration in our country. But I built coalitions and worked together with other senators to bring more people to the table. And we eventually got very big legislation done that liberated thousands of people from prison, disproportionately Black and brown people. And so I'm hoping that what we can do is build broader coalitions around ending of gun violence. And no, we're in the majority. The majority of Americans agree with us on doing a lot of the things that we've been talking about, which is the investing in evidence-based programs, investing in violence intervention strategies, investing in things that are basic that we know. There's actually a reduction in violence when you expand Medicaid. There's actually a reduction in violence when you expand feeding programs or SNAP benefits. And so these correlations that lower violence are things that we have to push for. And so I just want to keep coming back to the same theme, because I know I'm talking to activists, but young people have always been at the center of driving the change of politicians. One of my favorite moments in history, I know we tend to hail Martin Luther King as the great man that he was. He was far more radical than the watered down image of King that we talk about often today. But King in Birmingham in 1963 was failing to get people to organize. And it was a couple of his younger lieutenants, James Bevel and Dorothea Cotton, young people in their 20s, that came to him and said, change your strategy. And they challenged him, and they did change their strategy, and they allowed younger people to demonstrate. And they had kids 8 years old to 18-year-olds now demonstrating in front of Bull Connor, who unleashed fire hoses and dogs on them. But it so shook up the civil rights movement that it ignited the consciousness of this country. And next thing you know, the politicians, the white politicians in Birmingham, completely changed and gave up on segregation. Segregation fell. So I just think that the moment we're in American history is no less urgent. I live in a Black and brown, low-income community where we don't mistake wealth with worth. In a community that is similar to many of the communities in Chicago, we don't have time to wait. Every day we're losing brothers and sisters to gun violence, horrific gun violence. I've been to too many funerals where I see what is now a part of American culture, which is young Black boys in boxes. And so we have the same urgencies of the generation before, that civil rights generation. And we as creative artists have to find ways to drive the moral imagination of our country, to get folk woke, so that this is not a matter of can we reduce violence in America. It's the fact that we have not yet mustered the collective will. And that is the job of elected leaders like myself. But it's also the job of unelected leaders who have to, in this time, assume the mantle of leadership. Because the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. And the power of the people will always be greater than the people in power if we're willing to assume that mantle of leadership and exercise the power we have to change the realities in which we live.
Thank you so much, Senator. Violence intervention work is usually implemented and funded on the local level. But given that you are a United States Senator and that we're in the midst of a presidential election cycle, what can be done on the federal level to stop gun violence that disproportionately affects Black and brown communities?
Well, I think that there has to be a federal response. And I agree with you, though, that what's happening on local levels is really important. But I believe that on the federal level, we could be providing a lot more resources to those evidence-based programs I've talked about before. For example, research has shown that a combination of community-oriented intervention programs, common sense gun violence policies, and other things that improve the wellness and well-being of populations can really cut gun violence in cities in as little as half in just a few years. So we know that there are fundamentally the things that we can do on the federal level. And so the question is what are we willing to fund? We just, in the middle of a pandemic, we just approved a military funding. I voted against the bill overall. We are, as a country, spend more than the next 10 countries combined on military spending. When, if you think about this, it was talked about as a defense bill to the national defense. If you think about what's happening with gun violence in our country, is that we have had more people die in the last 50 years from gun violence and with every one of our wars combined. So we are a nation that finds the resources to invest in things that are supposed to keep us safe, but we're not investing in those things that actually will reduce gun violence and death in our community. So the federal government has trillions of dollars that they're investing every single year, but we are not investing in those things that would keep us safer and actually reduce the overall cost to our society. And so this is about federal priorities, because your budget not only reflects your priorities, but it reflects your values. And I believe we need to reconfigure of what it really means to keep Americans safe and sustain what is the national defense. And the more we can get into this enlightened understanding, that can affect our policies. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell folks of the value of the electoral process. Because if young people voted at the same level that the baby boomers vote, just the agenda of young folks on everything from climate change to reducing gun violence, I don't care what party you identify with, young people are far more progressive on these issues than older Americans are, and they exercise a lot more electoral power. And so one of the things we have to do is a fundamental element of citizenship is to vote so that we have more of a voice in what goes on in Washington. And then number two is never stop honoring the activism of the past, the sacrifices, the struggle, the blood, sweat, and tears of past activists. We have to continue that same level of activism now to ensure that we continue to drive the change at the federal level we need.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that answer. And one final question for you before we let you go. How do we make sure that voter messaging is approachable to communities that haven't had civic education?
That's a tough question, because I know that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and I know Senate campaigns, presidential campaigns will be spending hundreds of millions of dollars on messaging in this election. And I'm not in those inner circles of some of the races going on around our country. I guess the one thing I always think about is, how am I messaging? You know, all of us who have more than 10 followers on social media, we are all messengers. We syndicate information every single day. And I always challenge people to do an audit of what you post and see if you are really posting in accordance to your highest self and posting in the way of the urgencies of the moment. So I think that we have to take responsibility for answering your question, which is making sure that we are elevating messages and doing the messaging necessary to get to the heart and the spirit of all Americans, regardless of their background. We got to have messaging that gets folk woke. We got to have messaging that makes people feel uncomfortable sometimes. And we have to have messaging that is persuasive to many people who are surrendering to the seduction of cynicism, where they somehow believe that what they do doesn't matter. And God, where we would be if young activists in the civil rights movement just said, nothing I do can make a difference. Or if young activists in the suffrage movement said, nothing I can do make a difference. Or if activists during the AIDS crisis, when the Reagan administration was doing nothing on that pandemic, if the great young activists said, oh, there's nothing I can do to change my government. And so we have to somehow prevent the do-nothingness or the bystander mentality or the cynicism that infects a lot of our circles of friends, and somehow be determined and conscious and purposeful in our messaging, especially in these last 85 days before the most consequential election of the lifetime of anybody who's living right now. And so I'm going to think a lot as a senator. I'm running my reelection campaign in New Jersey about how to appropriately message. But at the end of the day, we have seen how creative messaging amongst people with platforms, that often can make a bigger difference in the behavior of your peers than anything they see through messaging on the TV or on the radio or the YouTube ads between the videos that we watch. So I just challenge you all. I've seen the social science data that the most persuasive people in an election are those who are directly connected, who know you. In other words, I can far greater influence a friend of mine than any TV ad that they're going to see. Mm-hmm. And those of us with circles that are in the hundreds should understand that when they post something, it makes a difference. And we should all be far more determined in the messaging that we send out and the programming of the channels that we curate every single day.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. Well, thank you again for your time. I know I speak for all of us when I say we so appreciate your advocacy both in and out of Congress. And that's it for our gun violence panel.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. It's really good to be on you. You guys encourage me more than you know. And as a person who's been directly affected by gun violence in my life, in my neighborhood, whether it's Shahad Smith, who was murdered at the top of my block, a young man I watched grow up with an assault rifle, to just, as I said before, seeing too many young people in my community. The work that you do is so vital and so inspiring, and the fact that you've sustained a movement with such strength. I'm just, you all are so much of my hope for our ability to together to change our reality and to truly bring peace to our nation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening to our panel. I want to bring up, it's really important that we all hold every single elected official accountable, whether it's our local elected officials or our ones in Congress, to really address the root causes of gun violence.
And thank you everybody for watching and viewing and listening to our discussion. And violence is happening in communities around the country every day. And you can be making an impact, whether that's donating funds or just being involved in the movement. So make sure you're getting out and being active.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. And I think we all can, take from that conversation we just listened to, and talk about it with our friends, our neighbors, our family, to make sure we all go and vote in November and in the primaries leading up to that day. It's so important that we exercise our civic duty if we are eligible to do so. And now we're going to bring it to my good friend David Hogg's video on voting. Enjoy.
No one elected official is going to change our country. It is going to be thousands of elected officials all around the country that we hold accountable as voters, and that we make sure that they are looking out for the future of our country by voting that will change our country. But we need you. In this fight. We need you to go out there and vote with us to make sure that elected officials take the global threat that climate change is seriously and address the fact that no child should feel in danger walking down the hallways of their school or down the streets of their community on a daily basis. Because every child should have an equal opportunity at educating themselves to find a pathway for success. But elections matter. Are we going to be a country that throws children in cages on the border and one that tears family apart and builds walls? Or are we going to be a country that brings people together and builds bridges? The option is up to us this November and every November when it is our time to vote, to use our power. We have the opportunity to shape the future of this country in this election and the elections that follow, but we have to start now if we want to have a chance at having a future. Because if we don't start voting now and Gen Z doesn't start voting now, Gen Z might be the last generation. We need you. We need you to use your voice. We need you to use your power. We need all of us to use our power to go out and register to vote, to protest, and hold our elected officials accountable. That's why I'm asking you to go to marchforourlives.com and register to vote.
Coming up now, a discussion exploring youth political power and the power of the youth vote with young leaders from United We Dream, the Sunrise Movement, and March for Our Lives, breaking down what's at stake this election and the pivotal role young people will play in it.
Welcome to the Youth Political Power Panel. I am your moderator, Ariel Hogg. I am the Strategic Partnerships Associate for March for Our Lives, and I am coming to you from Houston, Texas. I would like to welcome in all my fellow panelists, Cynthia Garcia, Nikayla Jefferson, and Trevor Wild. I'm going to send it over to Cynthia and she can tell you a little bit more about herself.
Thank you, Ariel. My name is Cynthia Garcia. I get the privilege and honor to work here at United We Dream as our National Campaigns Manager for Community Protection. I'm undocumented, unafraid, queer, and unashamed, and really grateful to share space with y'all.
My name is Nikayla. I'm an organizer with the Sunrise Movement in San Diego. And in the fall, I will be a PhD student at UC Santa Barbara.
Hi, my name is Trevor Wild. I'm a student organizer with March for Our Lives, working in the key battleground states of Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina.
Thanks to our panel. Let's dive right in. So I have a question for you, and it is, what do you say to marginalized folks who feel apathetic about voting since they feel that the electoral/political system has used them for their vote?
I think that often we think about folks who are impacted the most as the most disconnected from, mobilizing into voting and actually creating that wave of change. But I think what we've seen over the last few years, even more than before, is that it is because those issues are impacting our communities directly that we are the folks that are investing the most time of actually making those changes. And I think about immigration, right? One of the key parts of my identity and the community that I am accountable to, and think of how the last election, and for many years, it has been at the core of the rhetoric of, anti-immigrant sentiment in the country. And so I think that immigrants have been impacted directly through the last 4 years and even prior. And I think that immigrant families who will mobilize voters will also be at the solution of getting an administration that is not targeting them for political gain.
Definitely understand that, especially being a person of color. It's hard feeling like, the people that are asking for you to vote for them actually care about you, and you kind of have to remind yourself about that. For Nikayla, a majority of young Democratic primary voters backed progressive candidates like Warren and Bernie. Do you think these young voters now have an obligation to vote in this election?
Yes, I think we do have an obligation. 2020 is, I know this has been said before, but it really is a year like no other, as far as what's going on in our country and also in the world. I mean, we're approaching this window for climate change. And if we do not take bold, sweeping, and immediate action within the next year, we are headed towards absolute catastrophe. So I understand why people my age, they feel like Biden doesn't care about them, he doesn't understand them, whatever. That is probably true. But Biden is not Trump. And Biden has also made a commitment to climate policy, which is absolutely needed in this moment in time. So if young people want to have a future at all, we need to get Trump out of office. And unfortunately, right now, that means voting for Joe Biden.
Heading over to Trevor, both Cynthia and Nikayla both spoke about 2020 and these past 4 years and everything that's happened. What do you think makes 2020 different from the election in 2016 or from the midterms?
If you just look at the past 6 months, everybody has gone through this radicalization period, seeing very, very core parts of society kind of erode underneath our own fingertips. We've seen systems that were already broken, exposed by the coronavirus and the pandemic. We've seen the Black Lives Matter movement take over every single city. We've seen people out in the streets in numbers that we've never seen before. And what is that going to look like when we head to the voting booths? We saw this back in the 2018 midterm when youth voter turnout increased to record amounts. And that was because of a small little mobilization in 18-year-olds who, in record numbers, were being first-time voters. And in 2020, we've reactivated. We've seen what these policies, we've seen what the Trump administration has done to our lives. And that is going to be the first election in 2020 where we can do something about the Trump administration, do something about the policies that he's damaged, and the lives that have been affected by everything that's happened in just the 6 months alone.
Definitely agree. I got to vote in 2016. I always say that is one of my biggest failures in life. Just having that be my very first election, I definitely feel a ways, and I'm hoping 2020 is like retribution for 2016 for me, that I could actually walk away. Okay, it's not all bad. We have some hope coming out of this election. Hopefully, everyone does what they need to do. So I'm going to throw
If I could add on to that real quick.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the difference between now and 4 years ago is that today there are almost 50 million people between the ages of 18 and 29 that can vote in the U.S. And if we all vote, we take this election, like, hands down. That is a massive block. And our power is, like, unbelievable right now. And most of us aren't white either, which is, like, pretty exciting.
I definitely agree. You want to say something else, Trevor?
Yeah, I just want to add, like, we are the youngest and we're the most diverse generation. And our generation is the baby boomers, but a lot of us just aren't 18 yet, but we're turning 18. And a lot of us are, like, they call us the TikTok generation. I think that might be a little bit of a misnomer, because like there are so many other issues of society that we care about. And we are turning 18 in large numbers, and we're the most diverse generation that we've seen too. So what is it going to look like when we hit the voting booths?
Definitely.
We already lived 3 years of Trump. There is no way that we as a society, as an individual, as a person accountable to our community, can just lay back and say, like, we're going to leave it to fate, right? Because I think in 2016, there was also a lot of, like, there is no way our nation is going to vote this person into office. And there was almost this, like
arrogant,
almost like, yeah, and even like just this lack of energy, right? Of voting someone in that was going to be able to see the change that we want to see. And I think that in this moment, after experiencing the response to the coronavirus, the very full and direct erasure of Black lives and what it means to defund the police, and also like the unhinged way of like the way that DHS has been targeted immigrants, the way that the amount of deaths that have happened over the last, even the last 2 years, with a high record number of people died in detention centers. Like, we know what we can prevent and work towards fixing. And that will not happen if we do not mobilize that large block of voters to actually change the conditions.
I definitely agree. I definitely feel 2020 is everything that people wanted it to be, but not in this way. I think 2020 is the epitome of watch what you ask for, because you just might get it. Everyone was asking for, we're going to take off the rose-colored sunglasses, and I want you to open up my eyes, and I want it to be rebirth, and I want to see everything clearly. And we see this country clearly. Everyone sees this country clearly. There's no way we can hide from 2020. 2020 will be etched down like in stone in the fabric of this country for as long as this country is still around, because we can't hide from what we have seen. We can't hide from what we've seen on Twitter, from what's been broadcasted, from what we see on Facebook, from everything that we see. And because it's not just that it was seen here, it was seen around the world. This country has been revealed to the rest of the world, and I definitely think 2020 will be a breaking point. I think it's, which way are we going to go? Are we going to go with what's been happening, or are we going to at least take the first step into trying to change the course and rectify these issues that we have seen, issues that have been here forever? This is a really good conversation. I'm trying to make sure I don't get too lost into it.
I totally agree. Like in 2016, a lot of us were young. Like I was 19 years old. Like I had some sort of awareness, but like now my eyes are completely awake to the past 23 years of my life and the absolute governmental failure on every end. I mean, think about what we've come of age into, like the Iraq War, financial collapse, COVID, climate, police brutality, shot on iPhones. Like, this is something we've never seen before. And if young people don't come out to vote in 2020 with all of this behind us, I don't know. We have a moral obligation. Like, this moment is pivotal, and it's like no other.
Definitely. So sticking on this topic of young people, can each of you, so y'all can go in any particular order, share your thoughts on the power of our generation as a voting bloc? Because as Trevor mentioned, not all of us are 18 yet. Not all of us are voting age yet, but we know there's a humongous group of young people just waiting to that 18th birthday. So can you address how you feel about our generation as a voting bloc?
As a person who currently and in the foreseeable future would not be able to vote because immigration laws are just not going to make it accessible, right? I think of my community trying to find themselves and like what is the way that they can engage. And that is very relatable to young people who are feeling like, well, I'm not 18 yet, or like I still have to wait. And I think of the ways that United We Dream, we have launched trainings and webinars, and even on our United We Dream Action sister organization, we're doing the squad up, which means like, how do we get mobilizing done through our issues, right? So not just talk about like, why is it that I get myself to vote, but like, why do I get my family members, our community, and people who come up to us and is like, oh yeah, I'm sorry that this is happening around immigration. And it's like, nah, I don't need you to be sorry. I need you to take action. And that action means removing Trump from the presidency. It means holding accountable the next administration to revoke the harm that has been done, but also to set up conditions long-term that protect people without harming people. And that means breaking relationships with policing, taking the direct action to defund ICBP and the police, right? Because we understand that all forms of policing are a race issue, because it's our people, the ones that are getting policed. And it's our people, the ones that are getting criminalized and put in that deportation prison pipeline.
Definitely. Trevor?
I think we should get one thing straight. Like, one election is never going to solve every single issue that we have, and it's only the first step. But talking about those steps, you only have to be 18 to like push the button on the ballot box. And every single step before that, anybody can do. And like, I've only been in electoral politics. I've only been in activism for like the past 6 or 7 years of my life. And I don't have that much of like a time frame to look back on. But like, from everything that I hear in like an intergenerational space, people who've been doing this for 30, 40 years, people are getting younger and younger. Like, people are heading onto phone banks younger and younger. Like, in the work that I do at March, I have 13, 14-year-olds who are making like 100, 200 calls a day to build community and to build connections and to organize in different spaces. And you don't have to be 18 to do that. Like, just looking at the amount of volunteers that we have who are doing this for the first time, who are seeing exactly how they're being affected by these issues because of things like social media that generations before us didn't have. They're able to learn, and they're able to talk to their friends in ways that haven't been able to communicate before. And I think that key part right there is noticing that like just the simple act of voting is like just 1% of like being civically engaged, and every single part of that step is quite frankly, like, you don't have to be 18 to do it. And that's like a lot of what everybody in this panel, like, that's what our organizations do, is like we activate the people who might not have that to actually cast that ballot, but to be part of something that's so much bigger than just like submitting your ballot at the box.
Definitely. Michaela?
I think Cynthia spoke to this earlier, but voting, I mean, this is a John Lewis quote, right? Voting is the most powerful tool that we have as people in the United States. And thinking back to, I mean, I'm queer and I'm a woman and I'm Black, and people have fought and died for my right to vote. And I know things like COVID and climate change are going to affect my communities the most, and also the communities who aren't able to vote at all. So sitting out this election and not voting feels like I have failed my grandparents and people whose rights have been suppressed, and that the idea that I elect not to participate in the election, it doesn't seem right. Even if Joe Biden isn't the candidate I want, I still have this right to vote that so many people sacrificed their lives for. So I consider it my moral and my civic duty to cast a vote in this election. And voting isn't perfect, right? But it's what we have. And progress is slow. But with the tool of the vote, we progress more and more towards like a more perfect society, which I think is the common good, what we all want in the end.
Definitely. Speaking on to like feeling like historically, just knowing the people that have come before us that literally laid their life down, some on a bridge, some are in jail, some were hanged, and just knowing all that they went through, and they willingly put themselves in harm's way to make sure that people that look like us and have identities the way that we do have that opportunity and have that right to vote. It almost kind of feels like a slap in the face a little bit when some people are like, don't know if it's my thing. And I'm kind of like, what do you mean you don't know if it's your thing? It's kind of everyone's thing. It wasn't for some people, this was a big enough thing for them to give their lives for. So it's not just a thing. But on the topic of voting, and we all know the importance of voting, there have been some concerted efforts, especially in the lovely state of Texas that I am from, to make voting extremely hard. So, Trevor, and feel free, anyone can answer this, what are some of the biggest hurdles in voting rights and ballot access this year?
Like, to sum that up in one word, Republicans. Here in the state of Florida. In the 2018 midterm election, the voters of Florida took to a ballot initiative called Amendment 4 to restore voting rights to returning citizens. And that would have restored voting rights to over 1.4 million people. And we voted it. It was one of the, 66%, I believe, was the amount that it passed. And it was a historic victory for communities of color, for disenfranchised communities, and like everybody in the state of Florida, adding 1.4 million people to the voter roll. But our Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, who's also the same governor who is literally killing our state due to the coronavirus, he pushed the courts and said, you know what, we're gonna add a poll tax to that. There's going to be a lot of fine print for the returning citizens to get access to the ballot. And it's been held up in court. There's been decisions saying this is unconstitutional. There are parts of this provisions that aren't allowed. But the voters of Florida were very clear with a very decisive 66% margin saying that we want these 1.4 million people to have access to a ballot. The people in charge being the people in our state capital in Tallahassee. They said, no, that's not going to go. And if it was any other administration, I have a feeling that wouldn't have been interpreted the way that the governor in Florida right now interpreted it. But it's so much more than that. Like, that's like the thing that everybody knows about. And like voter disenfranchisement and like these tools that different levels of government have to restrict voting access, like particularly on a college campus. Here in the state of Florida, we're a very car-centric area. And a lot of our voting centers, like they're in college campuses or they're in downtowns. And the state of Florida recently had some provisions saying that if you want to have a polling place, you have to have a certain amount of parking spots, a certain amount of parking areas. And in downtowns, not that many people have cars, and it's expensive to have parking garages. So there's less polling centers downtown. Or on college campuses where nobody owns cars because they're college students. They're not able to have access to polling centers because it doesn't fulfill that small little requirement. And nobody really knows about that because there's like that intersection of like urban design and voting rights that nobody really thinks about, but it exists. And nobody thinks about that.
Definitely know that feeling. Especially in Texas, where they move your general election polling location like every year, or they just purge you from the rolls and just don't tell you about it.
And something really special. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Something really special about this year is that we have a pandemic, and voting in person isn't a smart idea. When you could give someone a potentially, a fatal disease. But we see right now in the Trump administration, they compared it to the Friday night massacre, which is a reference to Nixon back in 1974, I think, and cleared house for the U.S. Postal Service increased the price of a ballot by 3 times. And now we're seeing backlogs and delays for mail all across the country. So that's going to make it significantly harder to vote. This is like one of the greatest threats to our democracy probably in our lifetimes. And you have postal workers taking to Twitter saying that we need to get out in the streets and we need to protest this because so many people are going to lose their right to vote if they're not able to mail a ballot in on time or receive a ballot at all.
Definitely. You know, you have people in the government saying, oh, it's not secure for mail-in voting, but it's secure enough for you to send me my student loan information that you be trying to get to me through the mail that you want me to pay. It's secure for you to send this IRS information that y'all be sending to people. It was secure for people to file their income taxes, but it's not secure to vote. So, gotcha. I want to thank y'all for engaging in this wonderful conversation, and I want to thank all of the viewers for tuning in. And panel, if you want to say anything.
Thank you so much for having us, Ariel, and thank you for everyone for having this discussion and tuning in. I just want to remind everyone at home that when we fight back, we win, and so look forward to having y'all fight alongside with us.
It's been so great to be on this panel. You've been fantastic as a moderator. And to all the young people, I want to say that our lives really depend on the outcome of this election, and we need to vote like our lives depend on it because it literally does.
Thank you so much, Ariel, and meeting everybody on this panel was just the highlight of the year so far. Thank you so much. And for everybody tuning in from home, as we've talked about, have these conversations, the same questions that we talked about today. That's the way that we can keep building this movement.
Well, thank everyone once again, and back to you, Winter.
Thanks so much, Senator Booker and panel, and you, the audience, for tuning in and joining with us in part 1 of today's program. We hope that you are as inspired as we are by these amazing youth working tirelessly to make change in their communities and across the nation. We'll be back at 6 p.m. Eastern with more great conversations with Trevor Jackson, Logan Browning, Los Racas, Alok, Allison Stoner, and so much more. For now, please enjoy this DJ set from the amazing Nandi. And don't forget to visit into-action.us for the complete schedule of today's program.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome to Into Action. My name is Nandi. I'm going to be DJing and providing some tunes so we can all have the energy to take Black the vote in November. But I need you guys to make sure that you go onto into-action.us so you can get registered to vote. It takes all of us in this together so we can make change. So yeah, let's get started without further ado.
Bring me all of your dreams, you dreamers. Bring me all of your heart melodies, that I may wrap them in a blue cloud cloth, away from the too rough fingers of the world. All the progress that human beings have made on this old earth of ours grew out of dreams. That is why it is wise, I should think, to hold fast to dreams.
Never change for anybody else in your brown skin, girl. Your skin just like pearl, the best thing in the world.
I never trade you for anybody else singing.
She says she really grew up poor like me. Don't believe in nothing but the Almighty. Just a little jeans and a pure whitey. She never dreamed forever be nobody wifey. Yeah. She well, I mean, not pretty, but your heart is a miss. Play you like a villain cause she caught in a way. Tonight, I am walking away. 9 to 5, mine and I grind, yeah. Tonight I might fall in love, depending on how you hold me. I'm glad that I'm calming down. Can't let no one come control me. Keep dancing and call it love. She fights it by falling slowly. If ever you are in doubt, remember what mama told me. Brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. Your back against the world. I never trade you for anybody else. A brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. The best thing in all the world. I never trade you for anybody else.
Pose like a trophy when Naomi's walking. She need an Oscar for that pretty dark skin. Pretty like Lupita when the camera's closing. Drip broke the levee when my Kelly's rolling. I think tonight she might braid her braids. Melanin too dark to throw her shade. She minds her business and winds her waist. Roll like 24K. Okay.
Tonight I might fall in love,
depending on how you hold me. I'm glad that I'm calming down. Can't let no one come control me. Keep dancing and call it love. She fighting but falling slowly. If ever you are in doubt, remember what mama told me. Brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. You're back against the world. I never tried you for anybody else. A brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. The best thing about the world. I never tried you for anybody else. Oh, have you looked in the mirror lately? Wish you could trade eyes with me. Cause there's complexities in complexion, but your skin is glow like diamonds. Dig me like the earth, you be giving birth to everything alive, baby, know your worth. I love everything about you, from your nappy curls to every single curve, your body natural. Same skin that was broken, be the same skin taking over. Most things out of focus view, but when you're in the room, they notice you. Cause you're beautiful. Yeah, you're beautiful. Them and them gon' fall in love with you in all of your glory. Your skin is not only dark, it shines and it tells your story. Keep dancing, they can't control you. They watch and they all adore you. If ever you are in doubt, remember what mama told you. Brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. You're back against the world. I never tried you for anybody else. Say brown skin girl, your skin just like pearls. The best thing about the world. I never tried you for anybody else. It's a queen, she used to wear a crown. She gonna lead, cannot back down. No, don't you just know you can risk. If you are a king, then the king should respect. It's a queen, she used to wear a crown. She gonna lead, cannot back down. No, don't you just know you can risk. If you is a king, then the king should respect. If you're a man, you gotta know how to treat a beautiful woman. I lead and I don't follow. And these sayings are more than tomorrow. I was born with a plan for tomorrow, and my days stay unfolding. I know I'm a leader, and I don't know less. Everything I do is for the progress. It's more than you ever see. More when I walk in the streets. Real goddess and I me reign supreme. If you king, then you recognize queen. It's a queen. She used to wear a crown. She gonna lead, cannot back down. No, don't you just know you can risk. If you are a king, then the king should respect. It's a queen. She used to wear a crown. She gonna lead, cannot back down. No, don't you just know you can risk. If you is a king, then the king should respect.
Woman, real impression make the king feel happy. Real goddess, that's what she embodies. All she really needs is freedom spiritually. Wear the crown, now bow down to nobody. She's more than what you see in the magazines. Can't frighten her with Benz and Lamborghinis. Or respect it longer than 10 limousines. More than just beautiful legs in those jeans. She's more and more than you ever see. She's more and when she walks in the streets, real goddess and now she reigns supreme. If you're a real king, you know she's a
It's a queen. She used to wear a crown. She gonna lead, cannot back down. No, don't you just know you can risk. If you are a king, then the king should respect. It's a queen. She used to wear a crown. She gonna lead, cannot back down. No, don't you just know you can risk. If you is a king, then the king should respect.
brother, call a girl a bitch or a trying to make a sister feel low. You know all of that got to go. Now everybody knows there's exceptions to this rule. I don't be getting mad when we playing this cool. But don't you be calling me out my name. I bring rap to those who disrespect me like a dame. That's why I'm talking. One day I was walking down the block. I had my cut off shorts on, right? Cause it was crazy hot. I walked past these dudes when they passed me. One of them felt my booty, he was nasty. I turned around red, somebody was catching a rat. Then the little one said, yeah, me. And laughed. Since he was with his boys, he tried to break fly. I punched him dead in his eyes. Said, who you calling when I T-Y? You gotta let him know. When I T-Y, that's a good one. Here we go. When I T-Y, you gotta let him know. You ain't a here we go. When I T-Y, you gotta let him know. When I T-Y, that's a good one. Here we go. When I T-Y, you gotta let him know. You ain't a I hit the bottom, there ain't nowhere else to go but up. Bad days at work give you an attitude and you erupt. And take it out on me, but that's about enough. You put your hands on me again, I put your ass in handcuffs. I guess I fell so deep in love, I grew dependency. I was too blind to see just how it was affecting me. All that I knew is you was all the man I had. And I was scared to let you go, even though you treated me bad. But I don't wanna see my kids see me getting beat down by daddy smacking mommy all around. You say I'm nothing without you, but I'm nothing with you. A man don't really love you if he hits you. This is my notice to the tool, I'm not taking it no more, I'm not your personal. That's not what I'm here for. Ain't nothing good gon' come to you till you do right by me. Brother, you wait and sit in the when I T-Y. You gotta let him know when I T-Y. That's a corner, here we go. When I T-Y. You gotta let him know. You ain't a here we go. When I T-Y. You gotta let him know. When I T-Y. That's a corner, here we go. When I T-Y. You gotta let him know. You ain't a what's going on in your mind is what I ask you. But like yo, you don't hear me though. You wear a rag around your head and you call yourself a gangster. Now that you saw Apache City, I saw you wildin', acting like a fool. I peeped you out the window, jumping girls after school. But where did all of this come from? A minute ago, you wasn't heard and nobody ever heard of you. Now you a wannabe hard. You barely know your ABCs. Please, there's plenty of people out there with triggers ready to pull it while you trying to jump in front of the bullet. Young lady, and real bad girls are the silent type. Ain't none of this work getting your face sliced, cause that's what happened to your homegirl ride with no. She got to wear that for life. Who you calling the when I T-Y? You gotta let them know when I T-Y. That's the one, here we go. When I T-Y. You gotta let them know. You ain't a here we go. When I T-Y. You gotta let them know when I T-Y. Come on, here we go. When I T-Y. You must let them know. You ain't a
We don't know what we're made of. The same thing we're afraid of might improve us. Stay up all night, just lay up. Lose half, but it's paid stuff to make moves with. Or I'll be the cause when it ain't no room in Paris. We can still fly. Just make sure you pass it. No, you can't imagine. Ooh, it's automatic. The life we live is lavish. We don't have to be here if we stay. We don't have to leave if we go. Roll some more. And we ain't too high. We see eye to eye. Know you feel the rush from a simple touch. Baby, roll some more.
This feeling so electrifying, ain't got to catch no fly. No need to rush, girl, take your time. Rock it, we're skanking till the morning light. I roll my dove tonight. Drown me in your love, it ain't no crime. Whoa, woman, this feeling is bubbling over. So girl, whenever you're needing a soldier to roll up with you, I show love to you. It's all up to you, yeah. You don't have to walk away.
you can't imagine. Ooh, it's automatic. The life we live is lavish. We don't have to be here if we stay. We don't have to leave if we go. Roll some more. And we ain't too high. We see eye to eye. Know you feel the rush from a simple touch. Baby, roll some more. Special request to me, Caribbean queen. Woman, you know that you are every man dream. Your coconut kisses and make me match deep intellect. Connected like the chalice where I steam highly. With my empress men and by my side. The wickedest ride got me wishing this time would I never end sweet like a licorice pipe. Legitimate heights like a slip she eat. What a way, me say what a way. Feel like me hit the jackpot in the lottery. Guess it's my lucky day, me buck up pretty Anna K. University graduate, still she got a lot of grades. So the herb she never shatter. Woman, I know you've been hurt, but now you're smarter. So bring the whole of your love in my quarters. You nothing left for me, I'm myself forward, forward, forward.
Hey everyone, it's been so dope rocking with you all. Thanks for having me and thanks for partying with me. Now, I need you to go and follow me on Instagram at Donnie the Producer. And again, if you haven't registered to vote already, make sure you head on over to intoaction.us so you can get registered to vote so we can take Black to vote in November. Thanks, guys.
In 1950, Gwendolyn Brooks became the first woman to win a Pulitzer Prize in poetry. Globally, 30 women have followed in her footsteps. If I could author the future, I would write the world in the wild wonder of woman, where breathing is succeeding. No need to go the extra mile for half of the pay. It's essential. There's women in power at the table, bringing oceans of new perspectives, waves of women crashing against the shorelines. Hear our voices say, we are ready and able to guide. We have made great strides. With the revolutionary number of women running for office, over 100 women sworn into the 116th Congress. But we still have water to tread. We need access to equal opportunity, a future where college education is free, where gender and race doesn't affect you getting a degree. The future is in high schools, where meditations replace detentions. No more suspensions, we need to listen. Patience over punishment. I see a future where there is no child left behind. Our overpacked classrooms with no supplies. No more turning a blind eye to bullying, to kids who need nurses and counseling, to those who learn at a different speed. In schools, I want to learn about my culture and history. How my ancestors were royalty, and Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to be a pilot. I want a future with no hate crimes and peace for the LGBTQ community, protection for trans women of color. I want a future with no employment or housing discrimination based on sexuality or gender identification, because the future doesn't care if you're gay, straight, or trans. The future wants the chance to change. My heart is set on a world where Black lives matter, a future where no human is illegal, no kids locked in cages torn away from their parents, where indigenous people aren't going missing and people of color aren't the most convicted, where no one is a target because of their skin. I want a future where people who suffer from homelessness are treated like humans and not accidents. This future is not easy. It will not come if we don't call it. It will not happen if we don't make it. We must rise together, demand change, combat violence. We are in this undivided, the fire inside ignited, the love we give requited, our fists up united. The future is waiting for us to write it.